"Stop sending me these stupid risk emails," my new boss snapped. So I sent the final one to legal. In the boardroom, the auditor held it up. $62 million exposure? The CEO went pale. "What the hell did you ignore?" I knew I was about to be fired when legal asked me to bring my laptop to the boardroom. Not because I had done anything wrong. Because people like my boss, Graham Mercer, had a very specific response when consequences finally arrived. They looked for a human shield. And for the previous 11 weeks, Graham had been carefully painting a target on mine. I was standing outside conference room A, with my laptop under one arm and a coffee I no longer wanted in the other, when our Deputy General Counsel, Naomi Chen, opened the door. "Come in, Mara." No smile. No small talk. Through the glass wall, I could see 12 people seated around the long walnut table. CEO, CFO, General Counsel, Head of Internal Audit, 2 outside auditors, 3 board members, our Chief Operating Officer, and Graham. Graham was sitting at the far end in a navy suit, looking irritated rather than worried. That told me he still didn't understand why we were there. Then I noticed the printed email in front of the auditor. Mine, the one Graham had called stupid. The one I had sent to legal after he told me, in front of 6 people, that if I sent him one more hysterical risk memo, he would make sure I never worked in corporate strategy again. The auditor lifted the page. Highlighted in yellow was a line I had written 23 days earlier. Estimated aggregate contractual exposure. $62.4 million, excluding secondary regulatory penalties. He looked at Graham. "Did you receive this?" Graham leaned back. "I receive hundreds of emails." The CEO, David Lerner, turned toward him slowly. The kind of slowly that makes a room get quiet before anyone says a word. "What the hell did you ignore?" That was when Graham finally looked at me. Not casually. Not dismissively. He looked at me the way a man looks at a smoke detector after realizing the building is actually on fire. And the funny part? The $62 million wasn't even the worst thing in that email. That part was 3 paragraphs lower, but nobody had reached it yet. "My name is Mara Ellison, and until 3 months before that board meeting, I had one of those corporate jobs nobody at a dinner party understands. I was Director of Enterprise Risk Integration at Halcyon Meridian Group, which sounds like I spent my days inventing reasons to cancel Christmas parties. In reality, I translated bad decisions into numbers executives could understand. A sales vice president wanted to sign a contract with impossible service guarantees. I calculated the exposure. Operations wanted to use a subcontractor with a history of compliance failures. I calculated the exposure. Finance wanted to recognize revenue early using assumptions held together by optimism and PowerPoint. I calculated the exposure. Then I sent emails. Lots of emails. Nobody loves risk people. Best case, we're annoying. Worst case, we're the person who can later prove you were warned. That second part is why smart executives don't necessarily like us, but they keep us close. For 8 years, my boss had been Elena Ruiz, our Chief Risk and Controls Officer. Elena had one rule. If it can hurt the company, put it in writing. She said that to me during my first month. I had asked whether I really needed to send a formal follow-up after a senior executive dismissed a concern verbally. Elena had looked over her glasses. "Mara, memory is political. Email has timestamps. That became my religion. Every major risk warning got documented. Every disputed assumption. Every decision made over my objection. Every approval. Every deadline. Not dramatically. Not accusingly. Just professionally. Peer our discussion. For clarity, documenting the agreed decision. Risk remains unresolved pending." People mocked the language. Then, whenever something went wrong, those same people searched their inboxes for it. Elena respected that. Which was probably why Graham Mercer hated me almost immediately. He arrived after a leadership modernization initiative that removed Elena's position. That was the phrase HR used, leadership modernization. Elena called me from the airport the evening it happened. They gave me 20 minutes to leave. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the little dots next to her name in Slack. "What happened?" "They want risk under transformation." I frowned. Transformation was Graham's department. He had joined Halcyon Meridian 18 months earlier as Senior Vice President of Strategic Transformation. Nobody knew what that title meant either. But Graham knew how to talk to boards. Digital acceleration. Operational velocity. Cross-functional optimization. decision friction, value creation. He could use 5 phrases like that and somehow get permission to reorganize 200 people. Elena exhaled. Graham thinks controls slow down execution. He said that? He said mature organizations manage risk through leadership judgment instead of bureaucratic escalation. I was quiet. Elena knew what that meant. So did I. It meant people were tired of being told no. Mara. Yeah? Keep everything, I always do. No. I mean everything. That was the first warning. The second came the next Monday. Graham scheduled a 15-minute alignment discussion with me. 15 minutes is corporate, for I'm going to tell you how things work now. His office had been renovated 2 weeks earlier. Gray couch, abstract art, 2 bookshelves containing exactly 9 books, all positioned like props. There was also a framed magazine article about him, titled, "The New Corporate Operator." I'm serious. He didn't offer me a seat. Mara, I've reviewed your function. Okay. There's a lot of duplication between risk and what? He blinked. Various functions. Useful answer. He continued. I want your team to transition from what I'd call a policing mindset to an enablement mindset. I nodded. What does that change operationally? He smiled, not warmly. You'll learn I don't like defensive questions. I'm asking what you want my team to do differently. I want fewer escalations. How many fewer? His smile disappeared slightly. Mara? Leadership isn't a spreadsheet. No, but risk usually becomes one eventually. That was mistake number 1. Not because it was wrong, because he remembered it. Graham leaned against his desk. I've been told you're very smart. That sentence is never followed by anything good. But smart people sometimes confuse caution with value. I don't think I do. There? That? What? The resistance. I stared at him. He gave me a patient expression, usually reserved for children explaining gravity incorrectly. Elena trained you under an outdated model. Send everything upward. Cover yourself. Create paperwork. Make executives nervous. That isn't why we document. Then why? So people know what they're deciding. He folded his arms. Going forward, I want risk communication filtered through me. There it was. Filtered how? You send concerns to me, I decide whether they warrant executive escalation. Some risks have mandatory escalation thresholds. I'm aware. He wasn't. I knew he wasn't because our most important escalation policy was sitting unopened in the packet HR had sent him. I had access to acknowledgement logs. He hadn't clicked it. I'll send you the threshold policy, I said. His jaw tightened. Mara, just so we're aligned. I don't need homework. That was warning number 3. The 4th came 48 hours later. Our head of commercial operations, Patrick Shaw, forwarded me a contract amendment for something called Project North Star. Project North Star was Halcyon Meridian's biggest expansion initiative in a decade. We provided logistics technology and managed fulfillment systems for large retailers and pharmaceutical distributors. North Star was supposed to consolidate several client platforms onto a new cloud architecture, while transferring a huge amount of operational work to a third-party provider. The projected savings were enormous. $38 million in year 1. Potentially $70 million annually after full migration. The board loved it. Investors loved it. Graham had attached his name to it so aggressively that people sometimes called it Graham Star when he wasn't around. The amendment Patrick sent me involved performance guarantees for 3 of our largest clients. I opened the attachment. Then I stopped drinking my coffee. Someone had changed the liability language. Originally, Halcyon's exposure for implementation failures had been capped. The revised amendment removed 2 key limitations. It also expanded service credits, created automatic reimbursement triggers, and tied 3 separate client agreements together through a cross-default provision. Translation: 1 serious operational failure could trigger penalties across multiple contracts. I ran the first model, $18 million. Then I added stacked service credits, $31 million. Then termination assistance, $47 million. Then the cross-default. The number went above 60. I checked my formulas twice. Then a third time. I called Patrick. Who approved this language? Commercial says Graham. Legal? Pause. Mara? Patrick. They're bypassing full review. Why? Timeline. Of course. Timeline. The patron saint of bad decisions. I emailed Graham. Subject, North Star contractual risk, escalation required. I attached a one-page summary. Estimated aggregate exposure, $62.40 million, 3 contractual triggers, 1 unresolved dependency. Recommended actions. Within 7 minutes, he called me. No. I looked at my phone. Hello to you too. This email. No. What part? The whole thing. The numbers? The tone. The tone is arithmetic. You're making this sound catastrophic. It could be. Could. That's what risk means. He sighed. Mara. Do you understand how strategically important North Star is? Yes. Then why are you trying to derail it? I'm not. You sent me a red-rated escalation. Because it crosses the escalation threshold. I decide what crosses the threshold now. No. Policy decides. Silence. A different person might have backed down. I had spent 8 years working for Elena Ruiz. Silence just gave me time to take notes. Graham spoke again. Reclassify it Amber. I can't support Amber. I'm not asking for your emotional support. That's good. You're asking for my professional assessment. His voice cooled. Change it. No. That was mistake number 2. Again, not morally. Career-wise. He started dismantling my role the next morning. First, my weekly executive risk meeting disappeared from calendars. Then I lost direct access to the COO. Then my team's dashboard was removed from the executive portal because Graham claimed it created duplicative narratives. 2 analysts were reassigned to transformation projects without consulting me. My budget request was frozen. My title stayed the same. That was important. Corporate retaliation rarely begins with a dramatic firing. Smart bullies prefer starvation. Remove access, remove staff, remove visibility. Then wait for performance to decline. After that, they call the decline evidence. I documented everything. Not because I had decided to destroy Graham. At that point, I still thought the company would correct itself. That was naive. Graham was good at politics. Very good. He knew exactly how to frame me. In meetings, my concerns became Mara's preference for legacy process. My objections became organizational anxiety. My insistence on documentation became risk theater. He used the phrase risk theater 6 times in 1 month. People started repeating it. That's how corporate language works. A senior person invents a phrase, and 3 weeks later someone in finance says it like it came from Harvard. Then Graham promoted Claire Donnelly. Claire had been at Halcyon for 2 years. She was bright, polished, ambitious, and deeply committed to agreeing with whoever had the most authority in the room. Graham made her vice president of transformation governance. Governance. I almost respected the comedy. She now outranked me. Her first meeting with my team lasted 11 minutes. She walked in carrying an iPad and said, "We're moving from documentation-heavy risk management toward outcome ownership." One of my analysts, Dev, looked at me. I looked at my notebook. Claire continued, "We need less obsession with hypothetical downside." Dev raised his hand. Claire laughed. "You don't need to raise your hand." He lowered it. "What happens if the downside isn't hypothetical?" Claire smiled. "That's where business judgment comes in." Dev looked at me again. I wrote, 9:14 a.m. Claire Donnelly instructed team to reduce documentation of hypothetical downside, not secretly, right in front of her. Claire noticed. "What are you writing?" "Meeting notes." She frowned. "We don't need minutes for informal discussions." "I do." Afterward, she complained to Graham that I was creating a hostile environment. HR invited me to a coaching conversation. The HR business partner, Melissa, sat across from me with a sympathetic smile. "We've received feedback that your communication style can feel adversarial. From Graham or Claire. I can't discuss individual feedback." "So both." She shifted. "Mara, this isn't disciplinary." "Great. Please send me a written summary." Melissa paused. "Why?" "For my records." She knew me well enough to understand the answer. The summary arrived at 4:52 p.m. I saved it. 3 days later, North Star failed its first migration test. Not publicly, just internally. Transaction processing slowed, inventory feeds duplicated, a routing module timed out. All fixable. But the issue that bothered me involved disaster recovery. During one failover test, the backup environment didn't assume control within contractual limits. It took 53 minutes. 2 client contracts required recovery inside 30. The amended language Graham approved had made that failure expensive. I emailed him. North Star Risk Update #2. Potential service credit trigger. Estimated exposure if production incident mirrors test result. $6.8 million to $14.2 million, depending duration and client impact. Recommended delay before production deployment. He replied 3 words. Not actionable. Thanks. I saved it. 2 days later, another test failed. North Star Risk Update #3, then #4, then #5. Every time, I gave specific numbers, specific triggers, specific recommended actions. Graham began ignoring them. Until the Monday morning leadership call, when the humiliation became public. There were 18 people on the video conference. CEO David Lerner was asking about North Star launch readiness. Graham said, "We're green across the board." I looked at the status dashboard. 3 amber items, 1 red. David asked, "Any material risk?" I waited. Graham said, "Nothing outside normal implementation noise." That was false. So I spoke. "We have an unresolved recovery time issue tied to client service guarantees." Graham's face changed. Very slightly. "Mara. That's being managed." David looked toward my square. "Financial significance? Current modeled exposure ranges?" Graham cut me off. "Not significant." I stopped. David moved on. 10 minutes later, after the CEO dropped from the call, Graham said my name. "Mara." "Yeah?" "Stay." Everyone else suddenly discovered they had somewhere to be. Except Claire. Of course Claire stayed. Graham leaned toward his camera. "What was that?" "What was what?" "Undermining me in front of David." He asked about material risk. And I answered, inaccurately. Claire inhaled like I had thrown a glass. Graham went silent. Then he smiled. "You have a serious problem understanding hierarchy." "I understand it." "You clearly don't." "I understand that you're above me." "Good. I also understand the contractual exposure doesn't change based on reporting lines," Claire said. "This is exactly the adversarial behavior we discussed." I looked at her. "Do the servers know we discussed it?" "That was mistake number 3. Worth it." Graham removed me from North Star that afternoon, officially. The email said, "Effective immediately, all North Star risk coordination will transition to Claire Donnelly, to streamline decision velocity." I was told not to contact project leadership directly, not to attend steering committee meetings, not to distribute independent risk assessments, and not to create parallel documentation repositories. That final phrase interested me because I hadn't created one. Not yet. But apparently Graham was worried I might. So I started checking what had changed. Access logs showed several project folders had been reorganized, then renamed, then permissions restricted. Some testing reports disappeared from the shared environment. A disaster recovery worksheet had been replaced by a newer version with different numbers. The original test showed 53 minutes. The new sheet said 28. That was impossible. I called Dev. "Did your team rerun the failover test?" "No?" "Are you sure?" "Positive. The tracker now says 28 minutes. Silence. Then Dev said, "That's not our number." "Whose edit?" He checked. "Claire, there are moments in corporate life when your anger becomes useful. Before that, I was frustrated. Now I became interested. I downloaded the audit trail. Claire had edited the spreadsheet at 11:43 p.m. Friday. Changed 53 to 28. Changed status from fail to pass. Added a note. Validated after configuration optimization. No supporting test evidence. I stared at it for a while. Then I did nothing dramatic. I saved the version history, exported the audit log, saved the original test report, and made coffee. The next escalation came Tuesday. Our largest North Star client, Bellwether Health Supply, asked for written confirmation that disaster recovery testing had passed. Bellwether distributed temperature-sensitive medication. If our system failed during an outage, shipments could stop. Not hypothetical boxes. Medication. Their contract also had the ugliest liability clause in the portfolio. Our project team drafted a response. Claire approved it. The draft said, Halcyon Meridian has successfully completed all required recovery testing and currently meets applicable service level obligations. That statement was false. I saw it, because one of our compliance managers, Nina Patel, forwarded it to me privately. Her message said, "You need to see this." I called her. "Has this gone out?" "Not yet." "Legal review?" "Skipped." "Who wrote it?" "Claire." "Who approved it?" "Graham." There was a long silence. Then Nina said, "Mara, I don't want my name anywhere near this." "I know, if they send that certification." "I know." It wasn't just contract exposure anymore. A knowingly inaccurate certification to a regulated healthcare client could trigger a completely different kind of problem: internal audit, regulatory disclosure, potential fraud allegations, executive certification issues. Suddenly Elena's warning came back to me. Keep everything. I sent Graham what became my final risk email. I was careful. Very careful. Subject: Final escalation. North Star Client Certification/Contractual and Compliance Exposure. Graham. For the record, I do not recommend issuing the current bellwether certification. The statement that all required recovery testing has been successfully completed is inconsistent with the September 14th failover test result, showing a 53-minute recovery against a 30-minute contractual requirement. I also remain concerned regarding aggregate exposure under the revised North Star client agreements, currently modeled at approximately $62.4 million, excluding regulatory penalties, litigation costs, and secondary commercial impact. Please confirm whether you are directing the business to proceed despite these unresolved issues. Regards. Mara. I copied Claire. Nobody else. I wanted the response. Graham gave it to me faster than I expected. He stormed into my office 14 minutes later. Dev was at my desk reviewing another project. Graham didn't care. He held up his phone. "Stop sending me these stupid risk emails." Dev froze. I looked at Graham. "Which part is stupid?" "All of it. The contract number, the theatrics. I asked you to confirm your direction." "You don't need confirmation." "I do if the business proceeds." His face reddened. "Your job is not to build a paper trail every time you disagree with leadership." I glanced at Dev. Then back to Graham. "My job actually includes maintaining the risk record." "Well, I'm telling you to stop. Can you send me that instruction?" He laughed. Actually laughed. "No." That answered everything. He leaned closer. "You need to decide whether you want a career here." I closed my laptop. "I have." He stared at me. "Good." Then he walked out. Dev waited 5 seconds. "Was that a threat?" "Yes." "You okay?" "Perfect." I reopened my laptop. Forwarded the email to legal. Not to the general legal inbox. To Naomi Chen, Deputy General Counsel. I attached the original failover report, the altered spreadsheet, the version history, the draft bellwether certification, the contract amendment, the exposure model, and a short note. "Naomi, I am escalating under Corporate Policy 7.4 due to unresolved contractual and compliance concerns involving a proposed external certification. I have been instructed verbally to stop documenting these risks and have been removed from project governance. Please preserve the attached materials." Mara. Then I went to lunch. That part disappoints people when I tell the story. They expect me to say I smiled, or whispered something cinematic, or knew Graham's empire was about to collapse. I didn't. I ate soup, because once you send something to legal, there are only 2 possibilities. They care, or they don't. At 2:17 p.m., Naomi replied, "Received. Do not delete or alter any related records." That was all. And then nothing happened. For 9 days, which was terrifying. Graham became friendlier. That was worse. He stopped criticizing me publicly. Claire suddenly invited me to meetings again. Melissa from HR canceled my coaching follow-up. Then Graham asked me into his office. "Mara, I think we got off on the wrong foot." I sat down. "Did we?" He smiled. "I've been under enormous pressure." I assumed. "North Star is highly visible." "Yes, I can be intense." "Yes." His smile tightened. "I'd like us to reset." Okay. We don't need all this formal documentation between us. There it was. I said nothing. He continued. Sometimes mature professionals can have candid discussions without memorializing everything. I almost admired the phrasing. Are you asking me to delete something? His eyes sharpened. No. Good. I'm asking you to stop acting like every conversation is evidence. I looked at him. Some conversations are. The reset ended there. 2 days later, Bellwether received the certification. The false one. I know because Nina forwarded me the sent email. Claire had written, "We confirm successful completion of recovery testing." Graham was copied. So was our chief commercial officer. I forwarded it to Naomi. No commentary. Just the document. She replied. Received. Then, on Friday at 6:12 p.m., Northstar went live at 1:38 a.m. Saturday. It broke. My phone started buzzing at 1:46. First Dev, then Nina, then Patrick. I was technically no longer on the project, so I did something that required more discipline than anything else in this story. I did not log in. At 2:04 a.m., Dev texted. Primary routing down. Failover not taking traffic. At 2:19. Bellwether shipping queue frozen. At 2:47. Claire asking us to manually override transaction controls. At 3:05. They still haven't failed back. At 3:31. Graham is losing his mind. I sat in my dark kitchen drinking tea. My husband Owen came downstairs wearing sweatpants. What happened? Northstar. How bad? I don't know yet. He looked at my phone. You're smiling. I'm not. You absolutely are. I'm experiencing professional concern. At 3 in the morning? Very serious concern. The system stabilized after 4 hours and 17 minutes. 4 hours, 17 minutes. The contractual recovery requirement was 30 minutes. By Monday morning, Bellwether had issued a breach notice, another client issued a service credit claim, a third demanded a formal incident review. The estimated exposure climbed immediately above 12 million, then 20, then 34. Graham scheduled a 7:30 a.m. war room. I wasn't invited. At 8:10, I received an invitation. At 8:11, it was canceled. At 8:22, Naomi messaged me, "Do not attend project meetings unless legal asks." That was when I realized this was bigger than the outage. At 9:05, internal audit locked the Northstar project repository. At 9:17, Claire lost edit permissions. At 9:26, Graham called me. I let it ring. Not for drama. Legal had instructed me not to discuss the matter with project leadership. He called again. Then sent, "Call me ASAP." I forwarded it to Naomi. At 10:03, HR placed Claire on paid administrative leave. At 10:21, the CFO requested a full exposure forecast. At 11:40, Bellwether's legal department alleged that Halcyon had provided inaccurate pre-launch assurances. And at 1:15 p.m., I got the boardroom invitation. Subject, confidential, audit committee special session, bring laptop and supporting records. That was how I ended up standing outside conference room A, with cold coffee. Naomi opened the door. "Mara." I walked in. Graham looked annoyed. Still, I sometimes wonder what story he had told himself. Maybe he thought the meeting was about the outage. Maybe he thought he could blame technology. Maybe Claire had convinced him the altered test result was defensible. Maybe arrogance is just the ability to keep inventing explanations after reality has stopped cooperating. I took the empty seat beside Naomi. The external auditor, a gray-haired man named Leonard Voss, held up my email. "Ms. Ellison, did you prepare this analysis?" "Yes." "On what date?" "September 22nd. And this was sent to Mr. Mercer?" "Yes." Leonard looked at Graham. "Did you receive it?" Graham gave the answer about receiving hundreds of emails. That was when David, our CEO, went pale. "What the hell did you ignore?" Graham straightened. "David, this is being presented without context." "Then give me context." "Mara has consistently overstated risk to obstruct Northstar." I looked at Naomi. She gave the smallest nod. "Permission to speak," I said. "The 62 million estimate was reviewed by Commercial Finance." Our CFO looked up. "By whom?" "Daniel Cho." The CFO turned to his finance controller. "Is that true?" Daniel was sitting against the wall. He looked miserable. Yes, Graham snapped. Preliminary modeling. Daniel swallowed. No. Final model. Silence. Leonard placed another document on the table. The amended client agreement. Who authorized these liability changes? Graham said. Legal reviewed the contract. Naomi spoke. No, one word. Beautifully delivered. Graham looked at her. Naomi continued. Legal reviewed an earlier draft. The version executed by the business contains changes made after our review. David stared at Graham. Who made the changes? Graham shifted. I'd need to check. Naomi slid a page across the table. We did. It was the document history. Graham's account had uploaded the revised language. Now his face changed. Finally, not panic yet, but the first crack. He said, I was working from commercial's approved position. Patrick, who had been brought in remotely, appeared on the screen. No, you weren't. Graham looked toward the monitor. Patrick continued. I told you the cap removal created unacceptable cross-default exposure. When? August 29th, Leonard asked. Documented? Patrick nodded. I emailed him. Another page joined the growing pile. That was when I realized Naomi had done something much smarter than I had imagined. She hadn't investigated my complaint. Not exactly. She had preserved it. Then she had let internal audit reconstruct everything independently. No one could say this was Mara versus Graham. It was timestamps versus Graham. Audit logs versus Graham. Contracts versus Graham. His own messages versus Graham, and Graham was losing badly. Still, he tried. This organization is becoming paralyzed by hindsight. I almost laughed. Leonard didn't. This isn't hindsight, Mr. Mercer. These warnings predate the incident. Graham turned toward me. Mara was openly hostile to the program, I said. I recommended delaying launch. Exactly. Because the recovery test failed. Claire wasn't in the room. That mattered. Because next, Leonard displayed the spreadsheet. Original value, 53 minutes. Revised value, 28 minutes. He looked at me. Did your team change this result? No. Did you authorize the change? No. Who identified it? I did. Who made the edit? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Leonard turned the screen. The audit trail showed Claire Donnelly. David rubbed his forehead. Graham spoke quickly. Claire told me there had been additional validation. Leonard asked. Did you request supporting evidence? I relied on my vice president. Naomi opened a folder. Actually, you asked her to clean up the status sheet before the executive review. There it was. A Slack message. From Graham. Clean up the status sheet before the executive review. I don't want old test noise distracting people. Graham stared at it. For the first time, nobody rescued him. Not the CFO. Not the COO. Not the COO. Not HR. Not the board. He said. That does not mean falsify data. Naomi nodded. Agreed. That surprised him. Then she added, which is why we reviewed the rest of the thread. Next message. Claire. The 53 min result will still show as failed. Graham? Then fix it. We already know the environment is launch ready. Claire. What should I use? Graham. Get it below SLA. This is internal reporting, not sworn testimony. Nobody spoke. That line killed him. Not metaphorically. Career-wise. You could feel it. The board chair, a woman named Judith Kane, took off her glasses. Mr. Mercer. Graham's voice was lower now. Yes? Did you instruct a subordinate to change a failed control result? No. Judith pointed toward the screen. What do you call that? Poor wording. I looked down at my notebook because I didn't trust my face. Poor wording. Corporate graveyards are full of poor wording, Leonard continued. We then come to the bellwether certification. The room tightened again. The false statement appeared on screen. Successful completion of recovery testing. Judith asked. Who approved this? Graham looked toward Naomi. Legal should have reviewed it, Naomi said. Legal was excluded. By whom? We have the email. Of course we did, Claire had written. Legal review may delay client response. Graham had replied. Skip it. This is operational confirmation, not legal language. The CEO stood up. Actually stood. He walked toward the window. hands on his hips. You certified something that wasn't true, Graham said. We believed it was functionally true. David turned around. What does that mean? The system was technically capable. It failed. Unexpectedly. The test failed before launch. Graham pointed at me. According to her interpretation. And that was when Leonard picked up my final email, the one I had forwarded to legal. He read the first section. Then he reached the part nobody had discussed yet. The part below the 62 million. Ms. Ellison wrote, if the bellwether certification is issued, despite known failed recovery testing, the company may face not only contractual claims, but questions regarding intentional misrepresentation and executive control effectiveness. He looked around the table. Then at Graham. She identified the exact scenario that occurred. Graham said nothing. Leonard continued, and she requested written confirmation of the decision to proceed. David asked, did you respond? Graham looked trapped. No, I said quietly. You responded in person. Every head turned toward me. Judith asked, what did he say? This was the sentence, the simple one. The one that made the room completely silent. I looked at Graham. Then I said, he told me to stop creating evidence. Graham's face drained. Naomi glanced at me. Exact wording? I nodded. He said, your job is not to build a paper trail every time you disagree with leadership. Then he refused to put the instruction in writing. Dev had already confirmed the conversation. I knew that because Naomi had interviewed him. Graham knew it too. You could see him calculating. Witness, email, audit log, contract history, Slack, certification, outage, 62 million. There wasn't a path out anymore, so he did what weak leaders do when authority stops working. He became angry. This is insane. Nobody moved. I was brought here to transform this company, because everyone was sick of bureaucrats blocking decisions. David said, you altered control reporting. I accelerated execution. You issued a false client statement. I relied on my team. You ignored documented risk. Mara flooded me with worst-case scenarios. I finally looked at him. 5 emails. He stared at me. What? I sent you 5 North Star risk emails. That's not the point. You said I flooded you. It was 5. Judith looked at the auditor. Leonard checked the file. 5 appears correct. That was the petty part. I enjoyed it. Graham looked around the table for support. He found none. Then he tried one last move. Mara has been insubordinate since I arrived. HR's Melissa finally spoke. We reviewed that. Graham turned hopefully. Melissa continued. The documented incidents involve Miss Ellison refusing instructions that conflicted with formal risk policy. His hope disappeared. She was coached. Yes, Melissa said, because you reported her. And we are now reviewing whether those complaints were retaliatory. Graham leaned back. There it was. Villain collapse rarely looks cinematic. No handcuffs, no screaming. Usually it's smaller, a man realizing his title no longer protects him. A room that used to laugh at his jokes, suddenly avoiding eye contact, people he promoted becoming unavailable. Words like transformation turning into governance failure. At 3:42 p.m., Graham Mercer was placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. His system access was disabled before he reached the elevator. Claire remained suspended. The North Star program was frozen. Bellwether demanded independent remediation oversight. Our cyber insurer reserved rights. External counsel was retained. The board expanded the audit. And my $62 million estimate? It turned out to be conservative. The company ultimately recorded $41 million in direct client credits, remediation costs, and contract concessions. Additional contingent exposure remained open for months. But the money wasn't what nearly ended Graham. It was the certification. Internal audit concluded that he had deliberately bypassed controls, pressured staff to alter reporting, and approved an inaccurate statement to a client, despite documented warnings. Claire cooperated. Immediately. I heard she turned over everything. Texts, Slack messages, meeting notes, even screenshots of Graham telling her, I need solutions, not risk archaeology. She was terminated anyway. So was Graham. The announcement said they had departed the organization following a governance review, corporate poetry. Graham threatened to sue, then didn't. Probably because discovery, is a terrible place for people who hate paper trails. 3 weeks after the board meeting, David asked me to come to his office. I brought a notebook. Habit. He noticed. Are you taking notes? Yes. He sighed. Fair. His office overlooked the river. I had been there maybe 6 times in 8 years. He gestured toward a chair. I owe you an apology. I sat. For what? For allowing your function to be weakened. I didn't rescue him from the discomfort. Executives are surrounded by people who do that. He continued. Elena warned us. That caught me. When? Before she left, she told the board moving risk under transformation was a mistake. I thought about Elena calling from the airport. Keep everything. David looked embarrassed. We thought she was protecting her territory. She was protecting the company. I know that now. That's usually when people know. He almost smiled. Then he slid a folder across the desk. We're rebuilding the risk function. I opened it. Chief Risk Integration Officer, reporting directly to the Audit Committee and CEO. My name underneath. I looked up. That title sounds fake. David laughed. First time I'd seen him do that in weeks. We can change it. The reporting line matters more. You'd have direct access. Independent budget? Yes. Authority to escalate without operational approval? Yes. Written? He stared at me, then shook his head. Of course you'd ask that. Yes. Yes, Mara. Written. I closed the folder. I want Dev promoted, David blinked. To what? Senior manager. Done. And Nina. What about her? She gets formal protection for escalating the certification. That's already happening. I want it documented. He leaned back. You really are never going to stop, are you? No. He nodded slowly. Good. I accepted. Not because I wanted Graham's office, I didn't take it. When facilities offered, I said no. Too much gray. I kept my old office for another 6 months, until our team moved to a different floor. Dev became senior manager. Nina became director of compliance assurance the following year. Patrick moved into commercial governance. Elena? I called her the evening my promotion was announced. She answered on the second ring. I heard. From who? I have friends, you have spies. Same thing if they like you. I laughed. Then she said, Did you keep everything? Everything. Good, I used your line. Which one? Memory is political. Email has timestamps. She was quiet for a second. Then she laughed. Oh, Mara, what? I stole that from a lawyer in 2009. Seriously? Everything good in corporate life is stolen from legal. 6 months later, the board invited Elena back as an independent risk advisor. Graham's name disappeared from the company website, then from conference speaker lists, then from LinkedIn posts about Northstar. He eventually updated his profile to say he was advising select organizations on transformation strategy, which, as far as I could tell, meant unemployed, with a website. I never contacted him, never sent a victory message, never posted vague quotes about karma. Never told anyone I had destroyed his career, because I hadn't. That's the part people misunderstand. I didn't beat Graham with a clever revenge plan. I didn't trap him. I didn't trick him. I gave him accurate information. He chose to ignore it. I documented the choice. He chose to hide the failure. The systems documented that. He chose to pressure Claire. Slack documented that. He chose to bypass legal. Email documented that. He chose to certify something untrue. The client documented that. He chose to threaten me in front of Dev. Dev documented that. By the time the boardroom door closed behind us, I barely had to speak. That was the revenge. Not destroying him, making sure he couldn't destroy the record. A year after Northstar, we changed the company's risk escalation policy. The new rule required unresolved red risks above a defined exposure threshold to go automatically to legal and the audit committee. No executive could suppress distribution. No manager could downgrade a rating without written justification. Testing results were locked after certification, and changes required dual approval. During the policy rollout, I stood in front of 40 senior leaders. Some of them had watched Graham mock me. Some had repeated risk theater. Funny how nobody said it anymore. At the end, One vice president raised his hand. What if a leader believes risk is being overly conservative? I clicked to the final slide. That's fine. He looked surprised. It is? Yes. Disagreement is allowed. I paused. Undocumented disagreement is where people get creative. A few people laughed. The VP nodded. So if we disagree, we put it in writing? Exactly. And then what? Then everybody gets to be right on the record. That line became a thing around the company. People quoted it back to me. I pretended not to hate that. My team grew from 6 people to 19. We got better systems, better access, better executive sponsorship, and, surprisingly, fewer risk emails. Because once people knew warnings couldn't be buried, they started fixing things earlier. Amazing how efficient bureaucracy becomes when ignoring it has consequences. I still keep the original North Star folder. Not on my desktop. Not because I need it. Legal has the official record. I keep one printed item in my desk. Graham's reply to North Star Risk Update #1. Not actionable. Thanks. 3 words. I look at it occasionally when a new executive tells me documentation is slowing things down. Then I usually smile. Professionally. And ask the same question I learned to ask years ago. Would you like to put that in writing?